Hello and welcome to our first episode of Tasting the Bible. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Hegeman, here with the Fran Park Center for Faith and Life at Pinnacle Presbyterian Church. In this episode, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? We're going to travel back in time some 3,000 years to taste a little flatbread and some beef stew. And along the way through our desert journey, we may even encounter Abraham and Sarah and a mysterious set of guests who come through the desert to enjoy today's recipes. Before we even get started with today's recipes, I wanted to tell you that there are some foods you will not see at all in this entire series. And these foods are tomatoes, potatoes, squash, corn, pumpkin, blueberries, chilies. Lots of foods don't appear in the Bible. And why is that? All of the ones that I mentioned are foods that aren't discovered for another 1,500 years after the time of the Scriptures, after the time the New Testament ends. It's a long time before people in the Middle East or in Europe would have had any of those foods. So some of the recipes I found, I had to modify to remove potatoes and tomatoes and especially chili peppers. And think about that all of these recipes have to be spiced in ways that different from what we might be used to today. No paprika even. So let us go right ahead and look at a couple of recipes and think about what were the people eating in those days. And so we start off with Abraham and Sarah. Wow, a long time ago, and these were nomadic shepherd people. They were shepherds or cattle herding, and they traveled. They had tents and they lived in the desert. And so we have to think about foods that were simple for them to prepare, like simple flatbreads and prepared meat. So that's what we do. Right away, we're going to start off with a flatbread. So to start off for our flatbread, we had to think about what kinds of grains were used by the people in the ancient Near East, or we say in the time of Abraham and Sarah. Now they would have had wheat of some kind, and wheats of all the things that grew on a stalk. We had wheat and barley and rye, and they even had spelt. Now that may be new to some of you, but spelt flour is something that people have rediscovered in our own time. But these were the common grains. Now today, for today's recipe, I'm modifying it just a little bit to be gluten-free, and that's what I need to be today. So for my own sake, I'm doing that, but you can use any of these flours that would have been common in those days. And today we're going to use buckwheat for our flour to prepare a simple flatbread. And here are the ingredients. So start off with 2 cups of whole wheat flour or a spelt flour or rye flour or buckwheat flour. 3/4 of a cup of cold water or milk. 2 tablespoons of olive oil. 1 teaspoon of salt. Half a medium onion chopped finely. And 1 garlic clove minced. Now that we have all of our ingredients, this is how we combine them together. First, make sure you turn your oven on to 450 degrees. And then we'll combine all of those ingredients in a bowl and to form a dough and to knead that dough for about 3 minutes. Divide into 8 balls. Flatten each into a thin round and prick with a fork. And then bake on a greased cookie sheet for about 10 minutes in the oven. Our second recipe is a simple beef stew. Now it'll become more apparent why we have a beef stew in the midst of this story and looking about Abraham and Sarah. They would have been shepherds or cow herders, as traveling or people, nomadic people. Their livestock would have been very important to them. And they may not have eaten meat very often, but today, in today's story, we'll see as a special occasion. And so they do prepare a meat dish. And so for our beef stew today, here are our ingredients. Start off with 3 tablespoons of olive oil, 1 3/4 pounds of beef tenderloin cut into 1-inch cubes, 1 large onion chopped, 2 garlic cloves chopped, half a teaspoon black pepper, 2 teaspoons ground cumin, 1½ teaspoons ground cinnamon, 2 cups of beef broth or any other type of broth, half a cup of olives, halved, half a cup of raisins, 1 15-ounce can of garbanzo beans or chickpeas, half a cup of chopped cilantro, and 1 teaspoon of lemon peel. Now, putting all of this together is somewhat simple. Once we've got all of our ingredients together, putting them together goes like this. We heat up 2 tablespoons of olive oil in a heavy saucepan. And today we're going to use a Dutch oven to do this. Over medium heat. Sprinkle the beef with salt and pepper, and then working in batches. If it all doesn't fit in at once, work in batches and add the beef to the pan and brown on all sides, about 3 minutes per batch. And then when that's all been browned on all sides, then transfer that to a plate. Add the remaining 1 tablespoon of oil, onion, and garlic to the pan. Cook until the vegetables are soft, stirring frequently, about 10 minutes. Add the spices, stir for 1 minute. Add the broth, the olives, the raisins, the chickpeas, and cilantro, and bring to a boil. Simmer until juices thicken, about 5 minutes. And then add back in the beef and the juices and the lemon peel to the pan. Stir to warm through and serve. And if you're not ready to serve, set it aside for a moment and keep that warm until your guests are ready. Let me tell you a little bit about the spices we use today. You would have heard such things as cumin and coriander or cilantro. These were plants that grew naturally in the area, but also there was a major spice trade that was goes way back in history, that such places as India, where spices were grown. We had foods that came from India, especially spices that came in through Saudi Arabia and up into the Middle East, where the people of our scriptures lived. And so there was quite a bit of spice trade. We don't know exactly what they all were, but we do know that cumin and coriander or cilantro were spices that were common in the ancient Near East. What's remarkable about this story is that we see kind of a classic interaction between Abraham and Sarah, husband and wife, when 3 guests show up on the scene. Now they're out in the desert and it's hot during the middle of the day, but 3 guests show up. And what we see in the midst of the story is a radical hospitality. And when people are saying, somebody comes to your tent and you say, welcome, let me do everything I can for you. And I want to tell you that I've experienced this kind of hospitality living and working in the Middle East. You meet somebody for the first time and they say, it is so nice to meet you. You must come to our home and we will feed you. All right, they don't quite say it, we will feed you, but they'll say, come to our home and let us have dinner. And you walk into the home and there is just an amazing amount of food often set before you. And the most important thing in this hospitality is to share food together. And so that sets the stage for this remarkable encounter, Abraham and Sarah and 3 mysterious guests. So here we are in chapter 18 of Genesis. The Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre, as he sat at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. He looked up and saw 3 men standing near him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent entrance to meet them and bowed down to the ground. He said, "My Lord, if I have found favor with you, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. Let me bring a little bread, that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant." So they said, "Do as you have said." And Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, "Make ready quickly 3 measures of choice flour, knead it, and make cakes." Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the servant, who hastened to prepare it. Then he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree while they ate. They said to him, "Where is your wife Sarah?" And he said, "There, in the tent." Then one said, "I will surely return to you in due season, and your wife Sarah will have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent entrance behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. It had ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I have grown old, and my husband is old, shall I have pleasure?" The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old?' Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? At the set time I will return to you in due season, and Sarah shall have a son." But Sarah denied, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid. And the Lord said, "Oh yes, you did laugh." What we hear in this story is something that would have been quite common in the desert. Hospitality meant everything. As somebody was traveling, they needed the essentials. They needed water and other essential foods, some bread, some meat. And these make the foundation of many of the foods that we hear about in the Bible. They're essential. And the other part of this essential quality to the story is that hospitality was everything. It meant life or death. Unusual is this in this story is that these 3 people, we don't know who they are. Abraham doesn't know who they are right away. He sees three figures, and he immediately kind of opens himself and his world to these 3 guests. Now you would think that Abraham would be suspicious. 3 people traveling through the desert, who are they? I don't know who they are. I should probably just hide in my tent with my wife, and we'll just wait till they go by. But Abraham doesn't do that. He opens his world to them, and he creates a radical hospitality. And what I mean by radical here is a sense of it's foundational. It's like the roots that grow deep, seeking water in the desert. He opens himself, and he says to them, "Let me a little water be brought. Let me wash your feet. Let me prepare some bread." In fact, he goes to Sarah and says, "Quick, take 3 measures of flour." Now, if that word measure of flour was actually a lot of flour. We don't know. She could have made 40 loaves of bread with that much flour. But he says, use the choicest flour, the best flour we've got. We've got guests. And before Abraham really knows who these guests are, he is making a smorgasbord for these folks. And all of this, you think he would have taken time to prepare bread and to prepare this beef, right, for them, and some milk and some curds. And then all of this is brought forth. And in the midst of the conversation that ensues, Abraham learns more about who these 3 mysterious guests are. And the mystery is, are there 3 people, or is there just one person? Or is it a person at all? Is it just the Lord? Tricky, again, about this passage is that Christians, as they've read this passage, it's an ancient passage in the Hebrew Scriptures, but as Christians have read it, they said, yeah, it is the Lord. And the Lord is 3, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and they're all right there. And this has been represented in many different art, paintings, and icons. The visitation of the Lord to Abraham in 3 persons who are really one person. Because by the end of the story, it sounds like there's just one talking. it can be a very confusing story. But at the heart of it is hospitality. And so we say our episode today is called Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? And the idea is here is anytime we extend hospitality, we treat another as if they are God, if they are the Lord, or if we are entertaining angels unaware. And what better place and way to do that than around food? And so today we have bread, essential to life, and we have meat, a sustenance, also a sustenance for life, and we have a shared meal. So hopefully we'll have a guest come by soon, and we can taste what we've prepared today. Now that our beef stew has been cooking for over an hour in that Dutch oven, and all those flavors are simmering together, and we come to the point where we're going to actually taste our foods of the Bible. Our bread is made, and we have a guest with us. And just as Abraham and Sarah welcomed 3 mysterious strangers to their tent door, we have a mysterious stranger as well, Mr. Brandon Hegeman. Mr. Brandon Hegeman is our Director of Ministries for Youth here at Pinnacle Presbyterian Church. Welcome, Brandon.
Thank you. Glad to be here. As I walked into the space, I could just smell all of the spices, and so it smells delicious. Excited to try what we have.
Great. It is amazing to think about what spices did the people 3,000 years ago have in the Middle East. And before you came, we talked a little bit about how these spices came all the way from India, some of them. But some of these spices that are in this dish here are part of the world that they have. So cumin, you'll taste cumin, and maybe a little bit of cilantro, which is the seed form is the coriander. So let's go ahead. We have the bread. I'm excited to see how this buckwheat, my buckwheat loaf. Do you know what buckwheat is?
I don't know.
Well, actually, so buckwheat is a seed actually, and that's why it doesn't have gluten. All right, it's a seed, and it came from Asia originally. But by the time, with the time of Jesus, definitely, buckwheat would have been grown all over the Middle East. And so it's something they had. It's not in the Bible, but it was a seed that they had, and they could use it as they used many of the other grains. And so let's try it first, seeing how this bread came out. All right. So first, the quality of it. What do you notice about the bread?
Yeah, it's kind of a harder exterior. No, it's like a brown. Let's see, color. Some lumps. You could see like little maybe pieces of garlic.
Garlic, right?
That are in there.
And some onions. So let's give it a try. It's a very rustic bread, but let's give it.
There we go. That's a good description.
Definitely with the buckwheat. It reminds me of any time I've ever had a buckwheat pancake. You know, there's a strong flavor. Whatever flour you may use at home will have different textures, different aromas. So what does that taste like?
Yeah, kind of like a very kind of hearty, earthy type of of bread. But I do like the additive of the garlic and the some salt and the onion flavors coming out a little bit.
So. Again, simple breads like this were made all over the world, and the people in the Middle East would have taken what they had, the grains that they had, mixed it with a little flour, a little water, a little milk, maybe a little salt, just to bring that all together, and maybe cooked it over a fire. So let's try our beef stew here.
Okay, great. I'm excited.
Right.
It smells so good. Some great flavor. I can see like saltiness from the olives that are in here, and then some freshness that the cilantro brings to it.
Nice. It's kind of think about how Abraham and Sarah they gave their very best at this moment to these 3 figures. They brought out what they had, but they like a fatted calf. They didn't get to eat meat very often during the year, but to kill the fatted calf for these special guests was a real way to honor them. And so here's my way of honoring you today, Brandon.
Well, thank you.
Our beef stew.
You do feel very honored. Yeah.
Right.
Oh.
So
good.
We're going to take a little more time to enjoy our beef stew and our bread, and we invite you to come back for future episodes of Tasting the Bible. I'll ask Brandon one last question. So, does tasting food like this help you step into the story, like a story of Abraham and Sarah?
It does, yeah. It's fun to just think or just yeah, kind of surreal to kind of put yourself kind of into kind of their world a little bit and kind of the things that they may have experienced when they were engaging with one another and just enjoying each other and being in communion with one another.
Right. Yeah. So one last thing I'll tell you is like the word Bethlehem in Hebrew, Beit Lechem, it's often said as a house of bread, but the word lechem could also mean other things. It could mean just basically food. And so there's something that's a deep connection between house and food, and say that this is where God meets us, in our homes, around the table, coming to us as a guest unknown. And that's the theme of our show today was, guess who's coming to dinner? And the answer is God. All right? So watch out for God and the way God shows up in your life, and enjoy some good food.